Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. So, right here in my homeland of Canada, we are becoming more and more extrusionary of authoritarianism and becoming the kingpins of censorship. And we're getting further and further down that rabbit hole, ladies and gentlemen. True patriot love. We got to censor out the information. And now, with the partnership of Google, it's more becoming a reality that we're seeing more and more increased censorship. So, and this is all in behest of Google's new platform or their new program that they're introducing, they're using us as kind of guinea pigs to introduce their new misinformation program to Western countries. So take a look at this, for example. This is from Fortune magazine, and it says Google will now be pre-bunking online misinformation. Pre-bunking. So before any of it even hits the publish, before anyone gets a chance to read it, Google is going to decide whether it's safe or not to even allow on the internet. They're going to be the arbiters of whether it's allowed to even be said in public before people can make up their minds, before people can even read about it and decide whether if it's misinformation or not. We're just going to decide for you. Because, thinking is just too much of a ruckus right now. So let's just give it all to a big tech organization that's the most corrupted, evil, nefarious corporation, and let's let them decide what information we should be allowed to see before it even gets to be aired. This is just unbelievably crazy. So, Fortune magazine says, after seeing promising results in Eastern Europe, I'm probably guessing Ukraine because they have a lot of censorship over there, Google will now initiate a new campaign in Germany that aims to make people more resilient to the corrosive effects of online misinformation. Corrosive effects. That's their words that they're using. Corrosive effects of information. I didn't realize discourse and discussion was deadly. When I'm reading things online and deciding whether it's true or not and whether I should cover it, I don't feel my face like bulging out. I don't feel my face like eroding when I'm reading information and figuring out whether it's real or not, because I'll be looking at that information, analyzing it, internalizing what the messaging is, look at other platforms, look at other sources of information to counteract that, and then make a wholesome decision based on the information that I'm receiving. Critical thinking, remember those days? Remember they taught that in school once? I don't know if they still do, but apparently this day and age, we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to be critical. We don't have to do the thinking. Someone else is already doing it because it's going to be too corrosive. Oh my God. The tech giant plans to release a series of short videos highlighting the techniques common to many misleading claims. The videos will appear as advertisements on platforms like Facebook, YouTube, or TikTok in Germany. A similar campaign in India is also in the works. It's approaching what they call pre-bunking, which involves teaching people how to spot false claims before they encounter them. The strategy is gaining support among researchers and tech companies. There's a real appetite for solutions, said Beth Goldberg, head of research and development at Jigsaw, an incubator division of Google that studies emerging social challenges. Using ads as a vehicle to counter a disinformation technique is pretty novel. Gee, you think? Because no one in their minds, unless you're a complete psychopath, a complete sociopathic narcissist, would even bother to come up with this idea. The idea that we have to eliminate discussion before we even discuss it. So it's not bad that we have, censorship on the things we do publish, but the things that we're even thinking about publishing, we need to look at that and censor it all. Yeah, it's a pretty novel idea. And we're excited about the results, according to her. While belief in falsehoods and conspiracy theories isn't new, the speed and reach of the internet has given them a heightened power. When they catalyze with algorithms, misleading claims can discourage people from getting vaccines, spread authoritarian propaganda, foment distrust in democratic institutions, and spur violence. Wait a minute. So, are you saying in this sentence here that that it's discouraging people from spreading authoritarian propaganda? You're worried that people are not spreading authoritarian propaganda? Is that what it is? Is that what it is? Because I think that's absolutely fact. That they're not spreading enough propaganda, which is why you have to step in and censor out the anti-propaganda or the things that are critical of the propaganda so that we spread more of it and get into line and shut up and go exactly what the status quo wants you to believe. Or it's just going to spur violence. This is such a ridiculous thing. Utterly ridiculous. It's a challenge with a few easy solutions. Journalistic fact checks are effective, but they're labor intensive, aren't read by everyone, and won't convince those already distrustful of traditional journalism. Content moderation by tech companies is another response, but only drives misinformation elsewhere, while prompting sites of censorship and bias. And the fact that nobody's thought of, I don't know, thinking for yourself, you know, having second opinions, maybe looking at all the facts before you rush into judgment. Because before all this craziness with censorship, going online and researching and reading books and looking at all the facts used to be called reading. They used to be called reading. That's how you get informed. That's how you get educated on certain subjects. You were encouraged to do so. People were encouraged to do so and then think about what they're reading. That is no longer the case anymore, ladies and gentlemen. Now we have this tech backwards, upside down, big tech oligarchy that is suppressing all that and telling you to not think about anything. We'll handle it ourselves, and you just go along with the flow. Because apparently, deciding for ourselves what's real and what isn't, having that determination is too much for them. And I know they mentioned Germany and they mentioned about India. So what is Canada up to in this situation? Well, turns out Google's rolling out tests that block news content for some users in Canada. So they're silencing out news publications from Google searches here in Canada. That is how disturbing this gets. Is that Google, a big, giant tech oligarch, is aligning itself with our federal government to decide what sources are valid enough for people to read. That is just unbelievably insane. And how corrupted and criminal this all sounds. Because apparently discussion is deadly. Nuance is murder. According to the ridiculous narcissistic sociopaths that run Google. Having discussions, being open, and having frank, honest discussions like actual grown adults is too much for them. So this goes on by saying Google has launched tests that block access to news content for some users in Canada in response to the Canadian government's online news bill. Bill C-18, or the Online News Act, would require platforms like Facebook and Google to negotiate deals that would pay news publishers for their content. The bill is currently before the Canadian Senate for debate. The company told TechCrunch, that's the publication here, that the tests impact a small percentage of Canadian users. The test limits the visibility of Canadian and international news and affects all types of news content. We're briefly testing potential product responses to Bill C-18 that will impact a very small percentage of Canadian users. A spokesperson for the company told TechCrunch in an email, "We run thousands of tests each year to assess any potential changes to search. We've been fully transparent that our concern that C-18 is overly broad and if unchanged could impact products Canadians use and rely on every day. We remain committed to supporting a sustainable future for news in Canada and offering solutions to fix Bill C-18. This is like modern day 21st century tech fascism, ladies and gentlemen, that and huge megalomaniac corporation like Google is in bed with themselves in part of the Canadian government because of a bill that they're taking it over and deciding between the government and Google what information you're allowed to see. Unbelievably hinge-worthy, just cringe-worthy of how crazy this is. So, what exactly is C-18 here? So, this is from the government website here, and it says Bill C-18, an act respecting online communication platforms that make news content available to persons in Canada, also known as the Online News Act. So, here's the overview here. It says many Canadians access news content through digital intermediaries. Bill C-18 would enact the Online News Act, which proposes a regime to regulate digital platforms that act as intermediaries in Canadian news media ecosystem in order to enhance fairness in the Canadian digital news market. So, the Canadian government is proposing to align themselves with big, giant tech monopolies to figure out what is fair. They're trying to decide fairness out of all this. Considering we've already have a megalomaniac of corporate censorship plus governmental censorship, align themselves together to make it sound like they're trying to find fairness is utterly atrocious. And it's affecting people here in Canada. It's affecting the content creators like myself. It's affecting viewers like you that are watching this because it's no longer our decision to figure out what we can watch and what we want to watch. That's now gone to a bunch of unelectable people, corrupted individuals that are becoming the arbiters of what information is considered fair and allowed to be on the internet. What's considered newsworthy from the Canadian government. The bill introduces a new bargaining framework intended to support news businesses to secure fair compensation when their news content is made available by dominant digital news intermediaries and generates economic gain. It seeks to support balanced negotiations between the businesses that operate dominant digital news intermediaries and the businesses responsible for the news outlets that produce its news content. If one party initiates it, after a final offer arbitration process, we would be used at last resort to address scenarios which it will be negotiated agreements are not reached. The Canadian Radio, Television and Communications Commission, the CRTC, would support and oversee the admission of the regime. So it just seems like this is an extension of Bill C-11, which we've already went into detail of how atrocious that was, how insane that, again, the Canadian government trying to disguise themselves as helping you and saying that this is about fairness or we're trying to promote Canadian content. Again, you have to understand that this is coming after the trucker protests. This is all coming after COVID. This is all coming after the lies, the bigotry, the misinformation that the mainstream media was giving us. This is all coming after that factor. And also the fact that it's the Canadian government deciding what is considered Canadian content and what is considered acceptable Canadian content. Because myself, as a Canadian producing here in Canada, would be considered Canadian content by all forms, but under the eyes of the government, they might deem me as not acceptable. I'm not considered Canadian content, even though I'm a Canadian discussing Canadian news right now. Because I'm not appropriate. I'm not good enough for them. Who exactly is good enough for them? And here's just an update. This is from the parliamentary stance of this. So this is the Parliament of Canada. The fact that they're rushing into this, Google's rushing into this, but it hasn't even been passed. C-18 is still in the second reading of the Senate. So this hasn't even passed yet. They're still discussing it. They're still debating on it. But Google's already rushing ahead to decide, hey, you're going to be the guinea pigs for our new censorship drills. We're going to decide what exactly you're allowed to see on the internet without you even knowing about it. Because apparently you don't have the right to decide for yourselves what you can look at. You don't have the authority to decide for yourselves. You don't have that right anymore. They took it away and given it to a big tech oligarch alongside with the Canadian government to suppress that content. And maybe this also should be a reminder of exactly why they're doing this. Because as polling just came out, this is from June of 2022, Canadians' trust in the news media hits a new low. So maybe that's why they're cultivating these new scams, why they're cultivating these new bills that have to elevate Canadian content, elevate authoritative sources. We have to go after misinformation because the misinformation that we've been sharing with you in the mainstream media is not hitting Canadians well. They're not being propagandized. They're not falling into line. They're having different views, unacceptable views, as the Prime Minister once said to a bunch of truckers. So, of course, the media, the government, and big tech corporations are going to cultivate together to find a way to make sure that Canadians are always in line with the mainstream. They're always in line with the status quo, with the establishment narrative. It's all about narrative control. And here's just an example of it, and just recently too. So this is from Global News here, and this is from when they did the recent election back in 2021. So when Justin Trudeau called an election during a pandemic for no apparent reason, because he needs the ego boost, apparently. Little fragile man, he needs the ego boost of another election to make sure he claims victorious again. During a pandemic where we should be actually helping one another and trying to rail this out, he decides to call an election randomly. And this is him at a French language debate. And this is Justin Trudeau criticized Rebel News during a media scrum following the French language debate on Wednesday, saying the group needs to take accountability for its role in contributing to the increasing polarization in Canadian society. Not the fact that he should be holding himself accountable for polarization. You know, when you once told truckers that they were, the envy of the world, they're great heroes, they're doing the great work during the pandemic, everything's locked down, they're hard at work trying to make ends meet, trying to fill grocery shelves. They're the best people imaginable. To then saying that they're a bunch of neo-Nazis, to a bunch of racist, white supremacists with unacceptable views. You don't think that's polarizing? You don't think that's divisive against Canadian society? That no one's holding account to that? But it's Rebel News, an online press organization that's apparently dividing the entire country. And here's what he had to say about this. And just listen how crazy.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government, do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the Press Gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality...
Strong perspectives of journalism. Strong perspectives. As in, they repeat the talking points that Parliament gives them. Is that the kind of perspective journalism that is acceptable for Canadians? Or is actual journalism going against the parliamentary, going against the grain, and actually holding these people accountable? Because that, to me, is more journalistic than just repeating talking points. Because if you're just repeating talking points that Parliament is giving you, that's not you being a journalist. That's you being a stenographer. You're just referring to what they're saying. You're not actually holding things accountable. You're not asking questions. You're not actually reporting on any vital news that's effective and important to everyday Canadians. That's why people like Julian Assange, who is the most credited journalist on the face of the earth, is being tortured right now. But you get people like Rachel Maddow and Chris Chris Hayes. I was messed up on his name there. To even people here in Canada, CBC, Global News, CTV, like they're just repeating talking points. They're just mass information drones spreading like a sound wave. They're not actually doing credible journalism if they're not holding people like Justin Trudeau accountable. At least Rebel News is trying to do that. I don't agree with their stances. I don't agree with their solutions. They're a little more right-wing than myself, but at least they're holding somewhat accountable and doing what journalism is supposed to do.
The reality is, organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization.
The lack of basic science. Well, we would understand more of the science if you didn't silence all the doctors that were trying to understand the science, that were trying to follow the virus and the science of the virus and see exactly what the virus was doing so that we could prepare. We could have precautions. That's why a bunch of medical professionals said we need to boost our immunity. We need to build up our vitamin D. We need to build up our vitamin C. We need to be looking at things like ivermectin as an effective medicine and not horse goop. But you silence those credible people out. You silence those doctors. So who's really against the science? Who's not understanding basic science of this virus? It's him. Not us. It's him. Because you're silencing out credentialed people, credible people, doctors, nurses, virologists, epidemiologists, all those sorts of people were silenced out of the conversation to push the big pharma narrative to make sure that people are boosted with Pfizer and Moderna that wasn't even properly tested. Before it got rolled out. We were the test subjects.
Your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing.
So, if he's really, standing on guard and saluting the best of journalism, we got look after the people who ask the tough questions. Are you going to pardon Julian Assange? Are you going to pardon one of the greatest journalists, one of the greatest publishers to walk the face of the earth? The guy that's asked the toughest questions, so tough that he's in a captivity cell, that he's being locked away and detained and about to seek extradition by the United States. Are you gonna pardon those people? Are you gonna pardon Julian Assange for the credible work he's doing? Because you're saluting to journalism. You care about the people asking the tough questions. How about the other journalists that are detained? How about the other people that are asking the tough questions? How about myself? That's just a simple Canadian kid on a shoestring budget podcast in his basement. Like, I'm not expecting a special medal from him, but seriously? You're going to demonize those people that are asking serious questions, but you're going to pretend to stand up for the stenographers that just repeat exactly what you said? And let me just remind people this, because while he's mentioning about Rebel News and how it's destroying the fabric of society here in Canada and how it's, divisive and polarizing, let's not forget the exact words our Prime Minister once said to us Canadians directly during the pandemic, during the lockdowns. He said, this small fringe of minority of people who are holding unacceptable views do not represent the views of Canadians. He was definitely right on the wording, but he was pointing the finger at the wrong direction. And those are the people right there. Theresa Tam, Doug Ford, Justin Trudeau, Erin O'Toole, other members of the Liberal Party, other members of the Conservative Party, other members of the NDP Party, the entire governmental system are the fringe minority that are holding unacceptable views against Canadians. Because we're able to not be divisive. We're able to get along. We have proven that with the trucker strike. We have proven that ourselves when huge amounts of people gather together, all walks of life, all different religions, backgrounds, ethnicities, everything came together to realize that the lockdowns were not effective and proving actually harmful to people against the virus. It was actually more harmful for people, and more suicides were happening, more people with PTSD was happening, mental illnesses were skyrocketing, people with alcohol addictions were rising, people on drug addictions were rising during the pandemic situation. None of that was covered, none of that was mentioned until a Johns Hopkins University pointed that out directly, and they still screwed Canadians in the back. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Canadian government once again screwing our fellow brothers and sisters here in the true native land. True patriot love. True patriot love.